Imagine someone knocking at your door right now. You look through the peephole and see a stranger, cold eyes, hands hidden. He knows you're there. He asks one simple question. Is your best friend inside? Here's the thing. Your friend is inside, hiding, terrified. And you know, with absolute certainty, that if you tell the truth, your friend dies. So you'd lie, right? Of course you would. We all would. It's not even a question. But there was this philosopher, Immanuel Kant, and he said something that sounds absolutely insane. Never lie. Not even now. Not even to save your friend's life. Tell the murderer the truth and let whatever happens, happen. And before you write him off as a madman, here's what's haunting. He might have a point. This video is part of my series, Philosophical Moral Dilemmas. And today, we're exploring something that keeps me up at night. The moment when telling the truth becomes an act of violence, when lying becomes heroism, and when doing the right thing might destroy everything you believe about yourself. This is the absolute lie. When does truth become a threat? Let me tell you about Kant. Not the stuffy textbook version, but the man who believed he could solve morality like a math equation. Kant lived in a world drowning in moral relativism. Everyone had their own version of right and wrong. Different cultures, different rules, different circumstances, different answers. It was chaos, and Kant looked at that chaos and said, no. There has to be something absolute. Something that's true everywhere, for everyone, no matter what. He called it the categorical imperative. Don't let the fancy names scare you. It's actually a simple test. Before you do anything, ask yourself, what if everyone did this? What if this became the rule everyone followed, always, everywhere? Think about lying for a second. Really think about it. What if everyone lied whenever it was convenient? What if your doctor lied about your test results? What if your partner lied about their feelings? What if every contract, every promise, every I love you could be true or false with equal probability? Society wouldn't just be messy, it would be impossible. Language itself would stop working. Words would become meaningless noise. You couldn't trust anything anyone said, ever. Civilization would collapse not with a bang, but with a whisper, because you'd never know if that whisper was true. That's why Kant said lying is absolutely, universally, always wrong. Not because lies hurt people, though they do, but because lying destroys the very possibility of truth. It's like poison in a well. Once it's in there, everything that comes out is contaminated. So back to that door. Back to your friend hiding upstairs, heart pounding, while the murderer asks you that question. Kant says, tell the truth, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's insane. That's moral cowardice dressed up as principle. That's valuing abstract philosophy over a real human life. But hear him out, because this is where it gets interesting. Kant would say, when you lie to that murderer, you're not actually respecting him as a human being. You're treating him like a tool, like a machine you can manipulate with false information. You're using him. And the moment you use another person, even a murderer, you've violated something sacred. You've treated a rational being as a means to your end, rather than an end in themselves. Plus, and this is the part that really stings, you're not actually responsible for what he does with the truth. You're only responsible for your actions. Your duty is to tell the truth. His crime is his own. If you lie, you've made yourself into a liar. You've corrupted your own moral integrity, And for what? To save one life by destroying the foundation of all moral action? Now, I'll be honest with you. The first time I really sat with this argument, I hated it. It felt cold, inhuman, absurdly rigid. But then I asked myself a harder question. If I'm willing to lie to save my friend, where do I draw the line? When is lying okay, and when isn't it? Who decides? Me? The government? Popular vote? And once I've decided that truth is conditional, that sometimes it's okay to deceive, how do I prevent that exception from becoming the rule? Because here's what history shows us. Every atrocity, every authoritarian nightmare, every propaganda machine starts with someone saying, "We'll just lie this once, for the greater good." Still, most of us would lie to save our friend. We'd lie, and we'd sleep fine that night, knowing we did the right thing. But let me change the scenario just a little. What if it's not one friend? What if it's 1,000 people? 10,000? What if the person at the door isn't a lone criminal, but represents an enemy nation? What if the weapon isn't a gun, but a biological agent that could kill millions? What if lying isn't a split-second decision to save someone you love, but your actual job? What if you wake up every morning and put on a suit and go to an office where your job description is literally deceive people to protect national security? What if you're a spy? Here's something we don't talk about enough. Every democracy on earth is built on a contradiction. We worship transparency. We demand accountability. We teach our children that honesty is a core value. We celebrate whistleblowers. We impeach politicians for lying. Our entire system is supposedly built on truth. And at the exact same time, every single one of these democracies employs thousands of people whose entire job is to lie, deceive, and manipulate. We call them intelligence officers. We call it national security. We call it keeping us safe. And we really, really don't like thinking about what that means. Let me paint you a picture. This isn't hypothetical. This is the pattern that repeats constantly in intelligence work. You're an intelligence officer. You've spent years building a relationship with someone inside a terrorist organization. This person, your asset, has finally gotten access to the inner circle. And one day, they send you a message. There's an attack coming, 3 days from now. Multiple targets. Thousands of people could die. The information is solid, actionable. You can stop this. But there's a problem. The terrorist organization knows there's a leak. They're hunting for the mole. And if you act on this intelligence directly, they'll figure out who talked. Your asset will be tortured and killed, and every future opportunity to stop attacks will evaporate. So you have a choice. You can plant false intelligence, make it look like the information came from somewhere else, deceive your own oversight committees about the source, lie to Congress, lie to the press if they start asking questions, commit perjury, technically speaking, which is a federal crime. Or you can play it by the book, tell the complete truth to your oversight committees, risk the leak being traced back to your asset, and lose both the source and potentially the ability to stop the attack. You plant the false intelligence. You lie to the people who are supposed to keep you accountable. The attack is stopped. 3,000 people go home that night, never knowing how close they came to death. Your asset stays safe and continues providing life-saving information. And you've just violated every principle of democratic governance that you swore to protect. Kant would say you failed. You traded truth for consequences. You turned morality into a cost-benefit calculation. But consequentialists people who judge actions by outcomes would say you're a hero. You saved thousands of lives. You made the hard call. You got your hands dirty so others could stay clean. This is what philosophers call the exception. The moment when the rule breaks. When the textbook answer meets the real world and discovers they're not compatible. But here's what those philosophy textbooks don't tell you. For a spy, the exception isn't exceptional. It's Tuesday. You don't plant one lie and then return to normal life. You lie every single day. Every meeting is strategic deception. Every relationship is evaluated for intelligence value. Every conversation is an operational security risk. Your spouse thinks you work in energy consulting. Your kids don't know what you really do. For their own safety, you tell yourself. Your parents believe the cover story. Your friends are either fellow officers who understand, or they're part of the legend you maintain. Your hobbies exist to support your cover. Even your personality, the version of you that the world sees, is carefully constructed. You're not living a lie. You are the lie. Philosophers have a term for this: dirty hands. It's the moral stain that doesn't wash off. Michael Walzer described it beautifully. Sometimes you do the right thing and you're still contaminated. Maybe especially when you do the right thing. You saved lives. You served your country. And you're morally corrupted anyway. But there's something deeper. Something the intelligence community knows about but doesn't advertise. It's called moral injury. Moral injury isn't guilt. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Guilt has a path to redemption. Apologize, make amends, do better next time. Moral injury says, I am the mistake. It's what happens when you repeatedly violate your own deepest values. Not by accident, not in a moment of weakness, but systematically as a job requirement. Even when you believe the cause is just. Even when you know you're saving lives. Studies show intelligence officers experience moral injury at rates comparable to combat veterans. Depression, divorce, substance abuse, suicide. The statistics are devastating. You did everything right. You followed your training. You saved countless lives. You're a patriot, a hero in a classified file that almost no one will ever read. And you're broken. The mission succeeds. The agency continues. The democracy you protected keeps functioning with its principles of truth and transparency intact. But you, the person who took on the moral cost, you pay the price. Not the institution, not the state, not the citizens sleeping safely because of what you did. Just you, alone, with no one to tell. No one who would understand even if you could tell them. Here's the cruelest part. We need you to break so we don't have to. We outsource our moral contradictions to people who work in shadows. We get to keep our principles clean because they sacrifice theirs. We sleep soundly because they carry the weight of necessary evils we don't want to acknowledge. And we call this national security. So let's go back to that door one more time. But now the stakes have changed. You're not protecting one friend anymore. You're protecting thousands, millions, an entire way of life. And the person at the door isn't a lone criminal. It's a hostile nation, a terrorist network, an authoritarian regime that sees your democracy's commitment to truth as weakness, your transparency as vulnerability, your moral principles as tools to be exploited. Do you tell the truth? Kant's answer never changes. Truth is absolute. The moment you make it conditional, even to save millions, you've destroyed the foundation of morality itself. You've admitted that ethics is just utilitarianism in disguise, that the ends always justify the means. that there's no real difference between you and the murderer, except that you're better at math. But here's the question that keeps me awake. Can a country committed to truth actually survive in a world where its enemies have no such commitment? World War II was won partly because of Operation Fortitude, a massive, systematic campaign of lies that convinced Hitler the invasion would happen at Calais instead of Normandy. That deception saved tens of thousands of lives. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest we've come to nuclear war, was resolved through back-channel communications that required deliberate deception of Congress and the American public. Modern counter-terrorism depends fundamentally on double agents, false information, and protecting sources through strategic lies. Strip away the capacity for intelligence deception, and you potentially make democracies defenseless against adversaries who operate under no such constraints. So which is it? Are we noble for tying one hand behind our back? Or are we suicidal? And here's the question that haunts me even more. What does it mean that we ask individual human beings to bear this cost for us? Think about it. We, the citizens, the democracy, the society, we get to maintain our principles. We teach our children that honesty is sacred. We condemn politicians who lie. We celebrate transparency and accountability. And simultaneously, we employ people whose job is to systematically violate everything we claim to value. We stay morally pure because they get dirty. We keep our hands clean because theirs are stained. We preserve our principles because they sacrifice theirs. The philosopher Tony Cody called this out. The real corruption isn't in the intelligence services, it's in us. In a society that benefits from necessary lies while pretending we're not complicit, we can't celebrate our commitment to truth while depending on people whose job is to violate it. We can't have it both ways. So what's the answer? What do we actually do with this impossible dilemma? Do we abolish intelligence services and accept whatever comes through that door? Do we embrace Kant's absolute truth and watch as terrorists, hostile nations, and genocidal regimes operate freely while we maintain our moral purity? Or do we accept that some people must sacrifice their integrity for the collective good, and then have the courage and decency to acknowledge what we're asking them to do? Maybe that means building real support systems for moral injury, not treating psychological damage as weakness, not telling intelligence officers to just toughen up when their souls are fragmenting from carrying contradictions the rest of us refuse to bear. Maybe it means limiting the exception to genuine existential threats instead of letting it become routine bureaucracy. Creating real oversight that distinguishes between lies told to defend democracy and lies told to defend the intelligence apparatus itself. Maybe it means being honest, brutally honest, about the fact that our comfortable lives are built on moral compromises we've outsourced to people in the shadows. Kant believed morality was like mathematics, absolute, universal, provable. 2 + 2 = 4. And lying is always wrong, no exceptions, no circumstances, no debate. But I think morality might be more like engineering. When you build a bridge, you can't eliminate the opposing forces. Gravity pulls down. Structure pushes up. Compression fights tension. The bridge doesn't stand because it eliminates these forces. It stands because it holds them in balance. The tension is the point. Remove it, and the whole thing collapses. Maybe the moral life is the same. Maybe this tension between absolute rules and necessary exceptions isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to manage. Maybe the goal isn't to eliminate the contradiction, but to hold it honestly, acknowledge the cost, and refuse the comfort of easy answers. The exception remains unresolved. It has to, because the moment we resolve it, the moment we decide that truth is always absolute, or consequences always win, we've lost something essential. Right now, somewhere in the world, an intelligence officer is making a decision that will save lives and damage their soul. They're doing it because someone has to. They know the cost, they'll pay it anyway, and we'll go about our day, protected by lies we'll never know were told, defended by people whose names we'll never learn, benefiting from moral compromises we've decided not to think about. The moral exception isn't a failure of ethics. It's not a loophole or a weakness or an admission of defeat. It's the place where ethics becomes real, where philosophy meets the actual world, where we discover whether our principles are genuine commitments or just comfortable thoughts we have when nothing's at stake. The door is still there. The question remains unanswered. And maybe it should be. What will you do? Nero is probably the most infamous emperor Rome ever had. History paints him as a monster. The man who murdered his own mother, killed his wife, kicked his pregnant second wife to death, lit up parties with human torches, and supposedly played the fiddle while Rome burned. But those same history books also say the people of Rome loved him. Nero was anti-corruption, cut taxes, expanded slaves' rights, and even banned the death penalty. So, which is it? Was Nero a cruel, insane tyrant? Or something more complicated? That's what this story's about. Sure, I'll talk about all the horrific stuff he did, but by the end of this, you might start questioning not just Nero's story, but how history itself is written and who gets to write it. Rome's royal bloodline was a tangled mess, like one of those family trees that just turns into a full-blown spider web. Nero was born the great-great-grandson of Emperor Augustus, not exactly next in line for the throne, but still very much part of the conversation from birth. His mother was Agrippina, his father Gnaeus. Gnaeus died young, and Agrippina, ever the power player, married Emperor Claudius, who then adopted Nero. Claudius already had a biological son, but he clearly favored Nero. His advisors weren't thrilled about that. They warned Claudius that Nero was spoiled, detached, and showed signs of cruelty. And since Claudius had just followed Emperor Caligula, one of Rome's most unhinged rulers, you can see why people got nervous. But Nero himself didn't seem too interested in power. His mother, on the other hand, definitely was. Agrippina lived for control and manipulation. Her marriage to Claudius was likely just a political move. She wanted her son to become emperor, no matter what it took. And well, she got her wish. Claudius died suddenly, allegedly poisoned by Agrippina with a plate of mushrooms. Historians debate that part, but honestly, it fits her character a little too well. With Claudius gone and his son too young to rule, 16-year-old Nero became emperor of Rome. Once on the throne, Nero basically said, "Yeah, I don't actually want this job." He did whatever he wanted instead. At that time, artists were the lowest of the low in Roman society, but Nero adored them. He was creative himself, so he started hanging out in theaters and bars, sometimes getting drunk and randomly joining stage plays just for fun. He even threw massive public orgies and once married a man who took part in one. Whether he truly related to the lower classes or just liked their company, one thing was clear: they loved him. His charisma and rebellious, artistic energy made him a people's favorite. And he didn't just talk, he took real action. Nero inherited a broke empire drowning in debt, so he restructured the tax system to help ordinary people. He lowered taxes on individuals and businesses, funded public works to create jobs, and gave slaves the legal right to file complaints against their masters, something unheard of at the time. He even ended a war peacefully with the Parthian Empire. So yeah, the people loved him, but the elites, the Senate, they despised him. To them, Nero was making a mockery of the throne, mingling with artists, empowering slaves, and acting like some commoner. So Nero built his own circle of trusted allies, one that didn't include his mother. Agrippina, who had expected to rule through her son, was furious. She started supporting Nero's stepbrother Britannicus as a potential rival, and that's where Nero's downfall begins. Nero found out his mother was plotting with Britannicus to overthrow him, so he poisoned Britannicus first. Problem solved. Then came Agrippina. Nero started to wonder if he even needed her anymore, and decided he didn't. He invited her onto a boat secretly rigged to sink. It did, but Agrippina survived, swimming to shore. When she reached land, Nero's soldiers were waiting. They stabbed her to death. It's said that as they approached, she told them to stab her in the stomach, the place where she had nurtured the monster. It's poetic, almost too poetic, and maybe it didn't even happen that way. After Agrippina's death, Nero tried to spin the story. He told the Roman people that his mother had taken her own life, but nobody bought it. Word spread fast, and soon everyone knew he'd murdered her. Public opinion began to shift. At the time, Nero was married to Octavia, a woman adored by the people. She was graceful, charming, and deeply involved in public life. Rome loved her. But when she couldn't give Nero an heir, he turned on her, tried strangling her multiple times, and when that didn't solve his problem, he divorced her instead. The people were furious. They protested in the streets, outraged that Nero would humiliate Octavia, their beloved empress. But instead of listening, Nero saw this as a challenge, a chance to remind everyone who really held the power. So he had Octavia executed. By now, the walls were closing in. The people were turning against him, and the Senate had hated him from the start. A group of Roman elites finally decided enough was enough. They plotted to assassinate Nero. There wasn't even a clear plan for what would happen after his death. They just knew he had to go. But before they could strike, Nero found out. He executed 20 people on the spot and exiled a dozen more. Up to this point, Nero had been a cruel ruler, but after the failed assassination, he completely lost it. This is where the Nero from your nightmares, the mad emperor, truly comes to life. Not long after, disaster struck. Rome was engulfed in a massive fire that burned for 6 days straight, destroying 2/3 of the city. The famous story says Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned, but that's pure myth. For starters, fiddles didn't even exist back then, and Nero wasn't even in Rome. He was at one of his country estates when the fire started. When he heard the news, he rushed back and opened his palace to survivors, giving shelter to anyone left homeless. The legend of him playing music while the city burned was likely just a metaphor, one that history took a little too literally. But metaphors aside, Nero wasn't exactly innocent either. After the fire, he began building a new palace, massive, extravagant, with a 120-foot statue of himself right at the center. The people couldn't help but wonder, did Nero burn down Rome just so he could rebuild it in his image? To squash those rumors, Nero needed a scapegoat, and he found one. At the time, Christianity was a small, fringe cult in Rome. Easy to blame, easier to destroy. Nero accused the Christians of starting the fire. rounded them up, and unleashed unspeakable torture. Some were torn apart by wild animals, some were nailed to crosses, and others were burned alive. Their bodies used to light Nero's garden parties. Around this time, Nero's second wife, Poppaea, was heavily pregnant. One day, in a fit of rage, he kicked her to death, striking her stomach again and again until both she and the unborn child were gone. He then had her body embalmed and preserved in glass, so he could visit her every night and talk to her corpse. And if that wasn't enough, Nero later spotted a 13-year-old boy named Sporus, who looked eerily like Poppaea. He had the boy kidnapped, castrated, dressed in Poppaea's clothes, and forced to live as Nero's new wife. He even paraded Sporus around in public as a Roman empress, and on stage, Nero would perform plays wearing a mask of Poppaea's face. Meanwhile, the empire was falling apart. His new palace and colossal statue had drained Rome's treasury dry. When Nero ordered his advisor Vindex to raise taxes, that was the final straw. Vindex defected, joining forces with the governor of Spain and the royal guard to overthrow him. By now, Nero was living in constant paranoia. He knew death was coming. One morning, he woke up to an empty palace. He ran through the halls screaming for help, shouting into the silence, "Do I have no friends left? Not even an enemy?" With no one left to protect him, Nero fled to one of his estates in the countryside. When soldiers came for him, he begged his slaves to kill him. They refused. So Nero took his own life, stabbing himself in the neck while saying his final words, "What an artist dies in me." Nero had once been adored by the common people, a ruler who gave them rights, opportunity, and entertainment. But those people didn't write the history books. Here's the thing about Nero. Everything we know about him comes from just three men: Tacitus, Cassius Dio, and Suetonius. All three were wealthy political elites. All three despised Nero, and all three wrote about him decades after he was already dead. By the time they put pen to paper, Nero's entire family line was gone, and Rome had a new dynasty in power. So of course, it was in their best interest to drag his name through the mud. The worse they made Nero look, the better the new regime seemed by comparison. Their writings followed a classic Roman political tactic called vituperatio. Basically, the ancient version of say whatever you want about your enemies. No limits, no rules, no fact-checking. You could straight up make things up, and people would just nod along. And when you look closely, a lot of the stories about Nero start to fall apart. For example, that famous line about his mother begging to be stabbed in the stomach where the monster was nurtured. That exact line appeared in a play written just a few years before. A fictional story with completely made-up characters. Even the accounts of the Great Fire sound suspiciously recycled. They match earlier stories of other Roman cities being burned in attacks. And then there's Poppaea, the wife he supposedly kicked to death while she was pregnant. But here's the thing. Nero was obsessed with her. He was mourning their lost child and desperate for another. Would it really make sense for him to kill her? There's no hard evidence he did, only claims made by his political enemies. And even that story, the murdered pregnant wife, was a popular trope in Roman literature at the time. Over the centuries, Nero's name became synonymous with evil itself. Some scholars even argue that the concept of the Antichrist was modeled after him. But now, modern historians are starting to wonder, maybe Nero wasn't the monster we've been told he was. Maybe he wasn't a saint either. But he might not have been the devil. The story of Nero is one of history's greatest reminders of just how powerful narrative control really is. Because the truth is, history isn't written by the most honest people. It's written by the ones who get to hold the pen. We'll probably never know who Nero truly was, or what really happened 2,000 years ago. But in the end, it almost doesn't matter. Because when it comes to history, what's written counts more than what's true. Sponsored by you. I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and like while you're at it. Thanks. Technology is slowly draining the life out of us. Our days feel dull, our minds empty, our souls disconnected, our mental and spiritual health completely wrecked. And thanks to big tech and industrial society, the planet isn't doing much better either. This isn't about politics, not left or right, not conservative or liberal. The problems that technology has unleashed are universal, and they're only getting worse. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to burn it all down and start over. That was the philosophy of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. To spark his so-called revolution, Ted mailed bombs to people he believed were keeping the industrial machine alive. Ad executives, timber lobbyists, computer scientists. And while he was carrying out these attacks, he wrote an entire manifesto predicting where humanity was headed. Disturbingly, a lot of what he wrote turned out to be pretty accurate. But Ted wasn't just some random lunatic. He was a certified genius. He skipped grades, finished high school at 15, and started Harvard at 16. By 20, he had a degree in economics, and that's when things started to fall apart. At Harvard, Ted participated in a psychological experiment about mind control. Students were told to write essays about their goals and dreams, thinking they'd debate philosophy with others. But instead, their essays were handed to anonymous people who tore them apart, brutally and personally, while their brain activity was monitored. This went on every week for 3 years. Ted claimed later that it didn't affect him. Given how smart he was, maybe that's true. But honestly, who really knows? In 1966, Ted started having fantasies about becoming a woman, and even scheduled an appointment to discuss gender transition. But sitting in the waiting room, he panicked and walked out. He said afterward that he felt disgusted by his sexual fantasies, and it triggered something dark. He said he wanted to kill the psychiatrist, and then more people after that. He didn't follow through, but he later described that day as the turning point in his life, saying he rose from that darkness like a phoenix from the ashes. After that, Ted quit his job as a math professor and disappeared into a tiny cabin in the Montana woods. No electricity, no running water. He lived off wild plants and rabbits, occasionally taking odd jobs and money from his parents. His dream was to live completely off the grid, fully self-sufficient. And it's there, in that cabin, that Ted's war on modern society truly began. One day, while hiking through his favorite trail, Ted reached a rocky ridge by a waterfall, only to find that a road had been carved straight through it. He later said, "You just can't imagine how upset I was." From that day on, he decided he wouldn't just survive in nature. He'd get revenge on the system, destroying it. And he did. He broke into a vacation cabin built near his home and trashed it. He destroyed snowmobiles and motorcycles for invading his woods. He burned a bulldozer. He poured sugar into gas tanks. He even demolished a construction truck. But these acts of sabotage were just the beginning. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski mailed and delivered bombs that killed 3 people and injured 23 others. All of them, in his mind, soldiers of industrial progress. By 1979, the FBI had a massive task force, over 150 agents, dedicated to finding the Unabomber, named after his early university and airline targets. Yet for almost 2 decades, they had nothing. Ted was meticulous. He left no evidence, even planting fake clues to throw investigators off. Sometimes, the fingerprints they found weren't even his. Then, in 1995, still uncaptured, Ted sent out his essay, Industrial Society and Its Future, to major newspapers. He demanded it be published. If they did, he said, he'd stop the bombings. In his essay, The Unabomber Manifesto, Ted laid out his entire philosophy and the reasons behind his attacks. He began with a single, chilling statement. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. That was his thesis, his belief, his war cry. Kaczynski argued that humans have built a world we're simply not designed to live in. Across 35,000 words, he unpacked this idea, portraying technology as the poison and nature as the cure. According to Ted, we live in a society where the system comes first. Everything else, our freedom, our well-being, our individuality, comes second. We're shaped and molded to serve it, not ourselves. Take attention disorders, for example. They only become problems because they interfere with how productive someone can be within the system. There's nothing inherently harmful about a short attention span, but it makes you less efficient, so it must be treated. Meanwhile, depression rates skyrocket, yet instead of addressing the conditions that make people miserable, we just hand them pills so they can keep tolerating the intolerable. To Ted, this summed up modern life. Technology promises comfort, plumbing, electricity, the internet. And who in their right mind would say no to those things? But one by one, these conveniences sink their claws into us. They stop being luxuries and become things we can't live without. He used the automobile as an example. Once upon a time, owning a car was optional, a privilege. But then, cities began to revolve around cars. Roads replaced trails, suburbs sprawled out, and suddenly, not owning a car meant being trapped. Now you have to buy one, work to pay for it, register it, learn how to drive it, just to exist in society. Even pedestrians lost freedom. Sidewalks and crosswalks were built as afterthoughts, and walking itself became dangerous. And if you rely on buses or trains, your movement is limited to where the system decides you can go. Yes, we live in a so-called free society. But Ted argued that our freedom stops the second it interferes with how the system runs. He wrote, "What kind of freedom is it if you can only use it in the ways someone else allows? A dog on a leash is not free." And in his view, there was no way to change this. Industrial society had grown too massive, too complex. Every decision, political, economic, technological, now affects millions. So power naturally concentrates in the hands of corporations, governments, and experts. Even in a democracy, your vote is 1 in 100 million. Your influence is a mathematical joke. He believed this system couldn't be fixed, only escaped. Ted wrote that because our basic needs are so easily met, we've lost any real struggle for survival. We have food, shelter, and comfort, but no purpose. So we chase substitutes, money, hobbies, activism, collections, endless goals that never truly satisfy. He wrote, "How can you live if you have nothing truly meaningful to strive for and attain?" To him, we were trapped in an unnatural state. Humans forced to adapt to a machine rather than the machine adapting to us. And he warned that it would only get worse. He believed technocrats would one day begin genetically engineering humans to better fit the needs of the system, turning people from natural beings into manufactured products. Eventually, he wrote, society would become so complex that no human mind could possibly understand it. Only computers, artificial intelligence, would be capable of making sense of it all. They wouldn't be conscious, but they'd be the only ones capable of keeping the system running. At that point, humanity would hand over its control, not to tyrants, not to politicians, but to algorithms. Kaczynski didn't believe the system could be fixed. He called reform a childish fantasy. Technology, he argued, only multiplies. Any big reform would ripple outward in ways we can't predict. And those ripples, he warned, could be catastrophic. Who, he asked, would risk that when the people pushing for change are usually the ones who benefit from the system in the first place? He was also scornful of technophiles, the kind of people who insist science will save us. We've been hearing that for 200 years, he wrote. The Industrial Revolution was supposed to end hunger. By his count, it did the opposite. Every fix, he said, spawns new problems. Grow food with engineered crops and you enable population growth, and more people in tighter spaces mean more stress, more violence, more suffering. So Kaczynski called for revolution, full stop. If the system keeps expanding, he argued, the suffering will only get worse. And the bigger the system grows, the more catastrophic its collapse would be. Destroy it now, he said, and you might spare the future even greater misery. It was twisted logic, yes, but he sincerely believed it was the more humane path. And beneath the violence was love, a fierce love for nature. Primitive humans, he claimed, lacked the modern pathologies we suffer now. They met basics with struggle and skill, but they had meaning. Kaczynski thought real freedom and genuine fulfillment come from living according to nature, not according to a machine that tells you what to eat, where to work, and how to be useful. Some of his arguments read like left-wing critiques of capitalism. Yet Kaczynski hated liberals. He blasted both the left and the right, pointing out hypocrisies, demanding endless economic growth while resisting social change, or preaching freedom while building systems that choke it. To him, political labels didn't matter. Only two camps existed, those who suppress freedom and those who are suppressed. Then the manifesto did what he hoped it would. After industrial society and its future ran in the Washington Post, his brother David recognized Ted's voice in the text and tipped off the authorities. In 1996, they arrested Ted at his Montana cabin. He was convicted and given 8 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. He was found dead in his cell on June 10th, 2023, likely by suicide. Look, parts of Kaczynski's analysis sting because they're eerily right. Many of his predictions about technology and control read true today. But if you accept his worldview entirely, his solution, mailing bombs and murdering people to reset society, is monstrous. For most of us, me included, the idea that 2 decades of domestic terror made any positive dent in the world looks, at best, tragically misguided, and at worst, plain evil. Niccolo Machiavelli is remembered as one of history's original villains, and for reasons that feel justified. He turned away from the morals of his time, rejected Christian ideals, and cut goodness open at its root. In its place, he built a cold, deliberate system of power, ruthlessness, and deception. Machiavelli's work is a tangle of contradictions, harsh truths, dark advocacy, and fierce determination. Yet if you look beyond the caricature of his name, you'll find sober lessons about how the world really works and how to move within it. To grasp his thought, you have to know his life and the storm he was born into. He came into the world in 1469 in Florence. His family was old and respected, but his father Bernardo was its poorest member, a once practicing lawyer with few assets but many connections. Bernardo doubted religion as far as one safely could at the time. Machiavelli's mother was the opposite, a devout poet of hymns. This mix of skepticism and literary skill would shape her son's mind. Florence called itself a republic. On paper, 8 priors and a rotating head official ruled. Every 2 months, new names of prominent men were drawn by lot to stop any one group from seizing control. In practice, it was chaos. Policies flipped constantly. The Medici family manipulated the drawing to ensure their allies' names filled the urn. Florence was, in reality, a disguised dictatorship. This was hardly unusual in Italy. Wars erupted over scraps of territory. Mercenary captains betrayed their patrons overnight. Power and pretense were worlds apart. Machiavelli grew up watching this hypocrisy firsthand and learned what happened to losers in politics. When he was 9, men who plotted against the Medici were hanged upside down from a public building and left to rot for weeks. Corruption and brutality were not abstractions to him. Little is known of his youth, but he was well educated. When the Medici were overthrown in 1494, he entered government, drafting state papers. Soon he rose higher. At 28, he became second Chancellor of Florence, one of its 2 main departments, and Secretary of the Ten of War, which handled foreign policy and military affairs. No one knows how he rose so fast. Some call him a failed politician. That's not quite fair. For over a decade, he was Florence's top diplomat. His city was weak, his times unstable, and still he held high office. But in 1512, the Medici returned. They suspected him of conspiracy, imprisoned and tortured him, then sent him into exile. There, stripped of power, he wrote his most famous work. The Prince is not his only book, but it is the one that endures. It was written as a guide for rulers, specifically for Lorenzo de' Medici. At the time, greatness in a leader was measured by goodness, at least in theory. Machiavelli threw that aside. A ruler's duty, he said, was not to be good, but to keep and strengthen power. Ethics and politics, once linked, were split apart. The Prince is not a manual for living well. It is a manual for ruling effectively. Machiavelli didn't deny morality. He simply said it cannot always guide a leader who wants to survive. This was bold, even cruel, but it was honest. He could have softened his message, written as if power were distasteful. Instead, he wrote plainly, tearing apart comforting ideals and laying down a grim but often accurate picture of the world. He admired Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI. With his father's backing, Borgia carved out a state in Italy. In 1502, he seized the city of Cesena, then left his lieutenant, Ramiro de Lorqua, to impose order. Borgia gave him full freedom to be as harsh as needed. De Lorqua obeyed. He beheaded men in front of their families, seized property, castrated dissenters. When the city was subdued, Borgia returned. By then, the people hated de Lorqua, and by extension, Borgia. So Borgia staged a masterstroke. One night, he had de Lorqua cut in 2, his head stuck on a pike, and the pieces displayed in the town square. In the morning, the people rejoiced at their tormentor's death. Borgia addressed them, claiming Dell'Orqua had acted alone, a savage monster he himself had put down for the public's sake. It was ruthless, theatrical, and effective. A betrayal of a loyal servant, yet a perfect act of power. Throughout The Prince, Machiavelli praises Cesare Borgia as the model ruler. Machiavelli believed that goodness was admirable. It was even desirable. But, he said, you cannot be an effective leader and be good at all times. Politics, to him, was an endless knife fight. It demanded ruthlessness. A ruler cannot always be compassionate, loyal, humane, and honest, because the role itself will sometimes require cruelty, disloyalty, deception, and harshness. This is the frame for one of his most famous questions. Is it better to be loved or feared? His answer is revealing. It's best to be both, he says, but that's rare. And in general, it's safer to be feared than loved. People are fickle. Some are cowards. Some lie. Some can be bought. Some simply change their minds. They may swear love to you today and betray you tomorrow. But fear, Machiavelli argues, endures. Fear is a real, tangible restraint. It keeps people in line when their affection fades. Love can be forgotten. Fear cannot. You cannot command how people love you, but you can command what they fear. Still, there's a limit. Fear is useful, but hatred is dangerous. Hatred breeds assassinations and conspiracies. So, if you must be violent or cruel, do it swiftly and discreetly. Never let it harden into public hatred. Be loved when you can. Be feared when you must. But never, ever be hated. For Machiavelli, that was the mark of a successful leader. He also stripped honesty from the list of sacred virtues. Honesty, he said, is admirable, but not always effective. A cunning leader will outmaneuver an honest one. Circumstances change, and so must your promises. It may be ugly, but this is what it takes to hold power and build a state. If people will lie to you, he asks, what duty do you have to be truthful to them? Why hand your enemies a weapon you know they will use? Yet, even while rejecting personal virtue, Machiavelli insisted on its appearance. A ruler does not need to be virtuous. He must look virtuous. To win the people's devotion, he says, you need two things: appearances and results. Most citizens see only your words and your stage-managed image. Few glimpse what happens behind closed doors. They judge by what they see, not by what is. So speak and act as if guided by virtue. But they will also judge your success by your results. And you cannot always achieve results through honesty, kindness, or any other virtue. That is not how the game is played. Thus, we arrive at the house Machiavelli built, or at least the version the world remembers. Not necessarily cruel, but willing to be cruel. Not innately dishonest, but willing to deceive, to lie, to harm. This is a worldview scarred by cynicism, or as he might say, by realism. Over and over, he calls people unreliable, dishonest, selfish. And so, he says, you must be prepared to act the same way. But even this summary is incomplete. His writings hold not only darkness, but also unsettling truths. Machiavelli famously rejected Christianity as a practical guide for life. In The Prince, he writes, almost mockingly, I know many believe that the world is ruled by God and by fortune, and that no matter how shrewd men are, they can do nothing to protect themselves. He scoffs at the idea of God controlling our fates, and in that, there is a kind of inspiration. You, not God, hold agency over your life. Now act. As always, Machiavelli treats life itself as a struggle, a contest between virtù and fortuna. Throughout The Prince, he uses the word virtù. It sounds like virtue, but that's a misleading translation. Machiavelli was not obsessed with a simple struggle between good and evil. What fascinated him was success versus failure, strength versus weakness. There is no neat English word for virtù. Prowess comes close, as does force of character. But virtù is broader. It is any quality that lets you reach your goals. Talent, boldness, courage, willpower, cunning, intelligence. It is the inner power that creates agency. With virtù, a person can become truly great. Set against this is fortuna, fortune. Here Machiavelli is more straightforward. Fortuna is the part of life we cannot control. He writes that fortune determines about half of what happens to us. The other half belongs to us and to our virtù. He uses a striking image. Imagine a river that regularly floods a valley, destroying villages and killing people. That is fortuna. But we are not helpless. We can build banks and dams, channeling the water so that its floods do not harm us. This is virtù meeting fortuna. Preparation, planning, mastery. Fortune, he says, only holds power where you allow it to. With foresight and virtù, you can at least be ready when fortune strikes. The reverse is also true. You can succeed one day by doing X, Y, and Z, then fail the next, doing exactly the same things. Fortune changes, and so must you. Adapt or die. Machiavelli also believed there was a beast inside every human being. Beneath our morals, beneath our civilized habits, lives an animal driven to fulfill its desires. In this, he was ahead of his time. Carl Jung would later call it the shadow. Freud, the subconscious. Like them, Machiavelli urged neither suppression nor surrender. We must learn to work with the beast, be ethical, kind, and just whenever possible. But in pursuit of a goal, be willing to draw on the animal. Be the lion who scares off the hyenas. Be the fox too clever to be trapped. Playing only by the rules and morals of man will take you only so far. Machiavelli offers another piercing insight, the difference between the world as it should be and the world as it is. He warns that the gap between these two things is enormous. If you live by how the world ought to be, rather than how it actually works, you author your own destruction. The world is no utopia. There is goodness in it, but it is not wholly good. There are traps, lies, and threats. You must be wary of them and act with resilience. Live according to reality, not to your hopes about reality. This, more than any easy label of villainy, strikes at the heart of Machiavelli's philosophy. And yet, when we try to put his principles into practice, we hit problems. The Prince was written as a gift to Lorenzo de' Medici, an attempt to win back favor and employment after the Medici had imprisoned, tortured, and exiled him. Machiavelli never got the job. Lorenzo probably never even read the book. Even if he had, the irony is sharp. Why would anyone invite into their inner circle the man who openly celebrates deceit, backstabbing, and opportunism? Machiavelli's ideas, when public, become antisocial. They are powerful to read, but dangerous to be associated with. He sacrificed himself for his ideology. Who would read The Prince and want to stand next to Niccolò Machiavelli? The answer, it seems, was no one. Though not a total failure, Machiavelli never rose to great power. He drafted no constitutions, led no revolutions, governed no cities or countries. For all his theorizing, he left no clear record of having applied his own ideas with dramatic success. Perhaps, as he advised, he hid his moves. But history leaves little evidence of a truly Machiavellian Machiavelli. After the Prince failed to win him office, he drifted back into womanizing, and wrote bawdy comedies that made him famous but did not return him to politics. At one point, a Medici cousin asked for his advice on a looming war between France and Spain. He was tasked with strengthening Florence's defences, but when the time came, the Spanish bypassed Florence entirely and sacked Rome instead. The Medici fell again, and Machiavelli was out of work once more. He became ill and died within a month. His political career was small, but his legacy is vast. When The Prince finally appeared in print, an English cardinal said it had been written by Satan's finger. Pope Paul IV banned it at once. In France, during the violent struggles between Protestant Huguenots and Catholics, the young king, Charles IX, reigned in name, while his mother, Catherine de' Medici, a Florentine and daughter of the very Lorenzo to whom the prince was dedicated, ruled in fact. During the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered. Catherine was blamed. A survivor, Innocent Gentile, published a book depicting Catherine as a compulsive reader of Machiavelli and branding Machiavelli as the archetype of a cruel Italian villain. His work wrenched Machiavelli's ideas out of context and convinced readers that Machiavelli advocated unrestrained brutality and the rejection of virtue altogether. This distorted version spread quickly. It was translated into Latin and English before The Prince itself was available in English. Machiavelli's name moved from elite discourse into popular culture, inspiring the stock figure of the scheming villain in plays and literature. His name became a synonym for evil. In reality, Machiavelli's thesis was narrower, that Christian morals and effective leadership were not always compatible. Most people today would probably agree. While public opinion never fully softened, his philosophy has been embraced by leaders around the world. They are not all moral, nor all amoral, not all authoritarian, nor all permissive. But whether he predicted modern politics or helped shape it, his writings describe today's power games with uncanny accuracy. Modern politicians must maintain a facade of morality, and one hopes act on it when possible. But in practice, there remains a gap between ethics and ambition. Few would deny this. For me, the most interesting part of Machiavelli is not the early debates about his politics, but the deeper reflections on life, power, and human nature. They hold a wisdom that is timeless, even if we wish it were not. I resist much of Machiavelli's cynicism. I would never want to be like Cesare Borgia, nor have a leader like him. I believe people are basically good. Machiavelli would laugh at me. He would say, I am living by how I think the world should be, not how it is. There is a single-minded force in his writing. He does not care about goodness, about God, or about friends. His philosophy cares about one thing: power. And there is something almost admirable in that determination, even if it is not relevant to every life. Like all great villains, Machiavelli is dangerous. It is dangerous to swallow his ideas whole, and perhaps just as dangerous to ignore them completely.